The sun had just begun to rise over the sprawling city of Ibadan, casting a golden hue over the university campus. It was the first day of the new academic session, and the campus was buzzing with the excitement of students returning from their long holiday. Among them was Dapo, a 21-year-old student who had just been admitted into the prestigious University of Ibadan. He was a lanky young man with a deep complexion, sharp eyes, and an aura of determination that seemed to radiate from his very being. Dapo had grown up in the small town of Eid, where life was simple, and the aspirations of most young men were limited to inheriting their father's businesses or securing a government job. But Dapo was different. From a young age, he had shown an unquenchable thirst for knowledge, a curiosity that set him apart from his peers. His father, a humble businessman, had always supported his son's ambitions, even though he himself had never been able to go beyond primary school. Dapo's mother had passed away when he was just a boy, leaving his father to raise him alone. Despite the challenges, his father had worked tirelessly to ensure that Dapo had the best education they could afford. Now, as Dapo stepped onto the university campus for the first time, he felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. This was the moment he had been working towards for years, the chance to prove himself, to make something of his life. But the road ahead would not be easy. The university was a world unto itself, filled with people from different backgrounds, each with their own ambitions and dreams. Dapo knew that he would have to work harder than ever before to succeed here. He made his way to the hostel where he would be staying, a large, imposing building that loomed over the surrounding trees. The hostel was already bustling with activity as students unpacked their belongings and greeted old friends. Dapo found his room, a small but functional space that he would share with 3 other students. As he entered, he was greeted by a tall, muscular young man with a friendly smile. "Hey, you must be Dapo," the young man said, extending his hand. "I'm Kunal, your roommate." Dapo shook Kunal's hand, relieved to be met with such warmth. "Nice to meet you, Kunal." As they began to settle in, Dapo learned that Kunal was a second-year student studying engineering. He was from Lagos, the largest city in Nigeria, and had a reputation for being one of the best students in his department. Despite his academic prowess, Kunal was easygoing and quickly made Dapo feel at home. Over the next few days, Dapo met his other roommates, Sei and Bayo, both of whom were in their final year of study. Sei was a quiet, studious young man who rarely spoke unless necessary, while Bayo was the complete opposite, a lively, talkative fellow who was always at the center of attention. The 4 of them quickly formed a bond, sharing stories of their lives and their hopes for the future. As the days passed, Dapo immersed himself in his studies. He had been admitted to study economics, a subject he had always been passionate about. The lectures were challenging, and the professors were demanding, but Dapo was determined to excel. He spent long hours in the library, poring over textbooks and taking meticulous notes. He knew that his success at university would determine his future, and he was willing to make whatever sacrifices were necessary. But university life was not just about academics. There were social events, clubs, and societies, all of which beckoned to the students with the promise of fun and camaraderie. Dapo was tempted by these distractions, but he remained focused on his goal. He had come to university to succeed, not to get sidetracked by parties or frivolous activities. One evening, as Dapo was studying in his room, Kunal entered with a flyer in his hand. "Dapo, you should check this out," he said, handing the flyer to him. Dapo looked at the flyer, which advertised a debate competition being organized by the economics department. The topic was related to the impact of government policies on economic development, a subject that was right up Dapo's alley. "You should enter," Kunal said, noticing the spark of interest in Dapo's eyes. "You're one of the brightest guys I know, and this is a great opportunity to showcase your skills." Dapo considered it for a moment. He had never participated in a debate before, but the idea intrigued him. It would be a chance to challenge himself, to step out of his comfort zone. "All right, I'll give it a shot," he said, a smile spreading across his face. The weeks leading up to the debate were a whirlwind of preparation. Dapo spent countless hours researching, gathering data, and crafting his arguments. He was determined to win, not just for the recognition it would bring, but to prove to himself that he could rise to any challenge. The day of the debate arrived, and the auditorium was packed with students and faculty, all eager to see the contestants go head-to-head. Dapo was nervous, but he channeled that nervous energy into focus. He was the last speaker, and as he listened to the other contestants present their arguments, he mentally rehearsed his points, refining them in his mind. When his turn finally came, Dapo walked to the podium with a calm confidence. He began his speech, laying out his arguments with clarity and precision. His voice was steady, his points well-reasoned, and he spoke with the conviction of someone who truly believed in what he was saying. The audience listened intently, and when he finished, there was a moment of silence before the applause erupted. Dapo returned to his seat, his heart pounding with a mix of relief and exhilaration. He had done it. Whether he won or lost, he knew he had given it his all. The judges deliberated for what felt like an eternity before announcing the winner. When Dapo's name was called, he was momentarily stunned. He had won. The applause was deafening as he made his way to the stage to receive his award, a small plaque and a scholarship that would cover his tuition for the next year. As Dapo stood on the stage, holding the plaque in his hands, he felt a surge of pride. This was just the beginning, he told himself. There was so much more he wanted to achieve, and this victory had only strengthened his resolve. But as Dapo left the auditorium, basking in the congratulations of his friends and classmates, he had no idea that his newfound success would soon attract the attention of someone who would change his life forever. It was a few days after the debate when Dapo received an unexpected visitor. He was in the library, studying for an upcoming exam, when a man approached him. The man was tall, well-dressed, and had an air of authority about him. "Are you Dapo Adebayo?" the man asked, his voice smooth and commanding. Dapo looked up, surprised. "Yes, I am. Can I help you?" The man smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "My name is Chief Odogwu. I represent a group of influential businessmen who have taken an interest in your potential. I was at the debate the other day, and I was very impressed by your performance." Dapo was taken aback. He had heard of Chief Odogwu. He was one of the wealthiest men in Nigeria, known for his vast business empire and his connections to powerful politicians. "Thank you, sir," Dapo said cautiously. "I'm honored that you would take notice of me." Chief Odogwu waved a hand dismissively. "You have a bright future ahead of you, Dapo. But the world is not an easy place to navigate, especially for someone as ambitious as yourself. You need guidance, mentorship, and most importantly, resources." Dapo nodded, unsure of where this conversation was leading. "I can provide those resources," Chief Odogwu continued. "In exchange, all I ask is for your loyalty and your willingness to work with me when the time comes." Dapo's brow furrowed. "Work with you? In what capacity?" Chief Odogwu smiled, but there was something predatory in his gaze. "In the future, you will be in a position to influence decisions that could benefit us both. I'm offering you an opportunity to secure your future, Dapo. With my backing, there is no limit to what you can achieve." Dapo felt a knot form in his stomach. He had worked hard to get to where he was, and the idea of having someone like Chief Odogwu pulling the strings behind the scenes made him uneasy. But at the same time, he couldn't deny the allure of the offer. Chief Odogwu had the power to open doors that would otherwise remain closed to someone like Dapo. "Think about it," Chief Odogwu said, standing up. "You don't have to decide right away. But remember, opportunities like this don't come around often. With that, the chief handed Dapo a card with his contact information and left the library. Dapo sat there for a long time, staring at the card in his hand. He knew that accepting Chief Odogwu's offer could propel him to heights he had never dreamed of. But at what cost? Would he be sacrificing his integrity, his independence? The thought troubled him deeply. Over the next few days, Dapo wrestled with his decision. He confided in Kunal, who urged him to be cautious. Chief Odogwu is a powerful man. Kunal leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Chief Odogwu is not someone you get involved with lightly. His influence is undeniable, but it comes with strings attached, strings that could strangle you if you're not careful. Dapo sighed, running a hand through his short, curly hair. I know, Kunal. But the opportunities he's offering, they could change my life, change my father's life. We could finally escape poverty. Kunal nodded, understanding the weight of Dapo's decision. I get it, man. But think about what you're risking. Your freedom, your conscience. Once you're in, there's no getting out. Do you really want to be tied to someone like that for the rest of your life? Dapo knew Kunal was right. The more he thought about it, the more uneasy he felt. Chief Odogwu's offer was tempting, but it also felt like a trap, a gilded cage that would lock him into a life of dependency and moral compromise. That night, Dapo found it hard to sleep. He lay on his narrow bed, staring up at the ceiling, his mind racing. He thought of his father, working late into the night, hunched over his sewing machine, struggling to make ends meet. He thought of his mother, whom he barely remembered but who had always encouraged him to pursue his dreams, no matter the cost. And he thought of himself, of the bright future he had always envisioned, one where he could make a difference in the world, not just for himself but for others like him. The next morning, Dapo made his decision. He would meet with Chief Odogwu, but not to accept his offer, to turn it down. Dapo called the number on the card and arranged a meeting with Chief Odogwu at a private lounge in one of the city's most luxurious hotels. As he entered the plush, dimly lit room, he felt a wave of anxiety wash over him. Chief Odogwu was seated at a table in the corner, sipping a glass of wine. He looked up and smiled as Dapo approached. Dapo, I'm glad you decided to meet with me, Chief Odogwu said, motioning for him to sit. Thank you for making the time, Chief, Dapo replied, taking a seat across from him. There was a brief silence as Chief Odogwu studied him, his sharp eyes glinting in the low light. So, have you given my offer some thought? Dapo took a deep breath. I have, Chief. And I appreciate the opportunity you've presented. But after careful consideration, I've decided that I can't accept your offer. Chief Odogwu's smile faltered, replaced by a look of cold calculation. May I ask why? Dapo met his gaze, determined to stand his ground. I've always believed in making my own way, and achieving success through hard work and integrity. While I respect your influence and what you can offer, I want to do this on my own terms. I don't want to be beholden to anyone, no matter how powerful. The chief's expression hardened, and he leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. You think you can succeed without me? Do you realize how many young men like you have tried and failed? This world is ruthless, Dapo. Without the right connections, without someone to guide you, you will be crushed. Dapo's heart pounded, but he refused to back down. I understand the risks, Chief. But I've come this far on my own, and I believe I can continue to do so. I don't want to sacrifice my principles or my independence for the sake of success. Chief Odogwu stared at him for a long moment, and Dapo could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. Finally, the chief leaned back in his chair, a faint smile playing on his lips. You're either very brave or very foolish, Dapo. but I respect your decision. Just remember, this door will not remain open forever. When you're ready to face reality, you know where to find me." Dapo nodded, standing up to leave. "Thank you, Chief. I appreciate your understanding." As he walked out of the lounge, Dapo felt a strange mixture of relief and fear. He had stood up to one of the most powerful men in the country, but at what cost? Would Chief Odogwu retaliate, or would he simply forget about him and move on? Only time would tell. For a while, life seemed to return to normal. Dapo continued with his studies, attending lectures, participating in group projects, and spending long hours in the library. He threw himself into his work with renewed vigor, determined to prove that he could succeed on his own terms. But it wasn't long before he began to feel the weight of his decision. Small things at first, professors who had previously praised his work suddenly became distant and critical, opportunities that once seemed within reach began to slip away. His name was mysteriously removed from the list of candidates for an important internship he had been vying for, and his scholarship, which had been promised for the next year, was suddenly reassessed. Dapo couldn't shake the feeling that Chief Odogwu was behind it all, subtly pulling strings to make his life more difficult. The chief had warned him that the world was ruthless, and now Dapo was beginning to understand just how true that was. One evening, as Dapo was studying in his room, Kunal came in, his face serious. "Dapo, we need to talk." Dapo looked up, sensing the urgency in his friend's voice. "What's wrong?" Kunal closed the door behind him and sat down on the edge of Dapo's bed. "I've been hearing things, rumors, mostly, but they're concerning. Some people are saying that you've made an enemy of Chief Odogwu, and he's not happy about it." Dapo's heart sank. "I had a feeling he might retaliate, but I didn't think it would be this bad." Kunal shook his head. "It's not just bad, Dapo. It's dangerous. Chief Odogwu is known for being vindictive. If he sees you as a threat or as someone who defied him, he won't just make your academic life difficult. He could ruin you financially, socially, even physically." Dapo felt a chill run down his spine. He had known there would be consequences, but he hadn't fully grasped the extent of Chief Odogwu's reach. "What should I do, Kunal? I can't just give in." Kunal sighed, looking at his friend with a mixture of sympathy and worry. "I don't know, man. But you need to be careful. Watch your back, and don't trust anyone. This is bigger than just school politics now." Dapo nodded, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had made his choice, and now he would have to face the consequences, whatever they might be. The next few months were a nightmare. Dapo found himself increasingly isolated, as friends and classmates distanced themselves either out of fear or because they had been warned to stay away. His grades, once among the highest in his class, began to slip as the pressure mounted and the distractions became overwhelming. He began to notice strangers watching him, following him around campus. His phone was mysteriously disconnected one day, and his bank account was frozen without explanation. When he tried to report these incidents, he was met with indifference or outright hostility from the authorities, who seemed to be under Chief Odogwu's influence. Dapo's mental and physical health began to deteriorate. He became paranoid, constantly looking over his shoulder, and his once boundless energy was replaced by exhaustion and fear. He barely slept, plagued by nightmares and the constant anxiety that something terrible was about to happen. One night, as he was walking back to his hostel from the library, he was approached by two men he didn't recognize. They were dressed in plain clothes, but their demeanor was anything but casual.
"You're Dapo, right?" one of them asked, his tone casual, but with an edge that sent a shiver down Dapo's spine. "Yes," Dapo replied, trying to keep his voice steady. The other man stepped closer, his eyes cold and calculating. "Chief Odogwu sends his regards." He wants you to know that it's not too late to reconsider his offer." Dapo swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. "I already made my decision. I won't be swayed." The first man shrugged, as if Dapo's response was expected but disappointing. "That's a shame. But remember, everyone has a breaking point. We'll see how long you can hold out." With that, the two men turned and walked away, leaving Dapo standing in the dark, his mind racing. He knew now that Chief Odogwu would not give up until he was either broken or compliant. Dapo knew he couldn't go on like this. He had to make a decision: either continue resisting and risk losing everything, or find a way to survive without compromising his principles. He spent the next few days in deep thought, weighing his options. He considered going to the media, exposing Chief Odogwu's tactics, but he knew that without solid evidence, it would be his word against the chief's, and the odds were not in his favor. He also thought about leaving the university, going into hiding, but that would mean giving up on everything he had worked for. Finally, Dapo made his choice. He decided to confront Chief Odogwu one last time, but this.
Dapo's decision to confront Chief Odogwu was not made lightly. He knew it was a gamble, a dangerous one, but he also knew that he could not continue living in fear. He reached out to Kunal, who reluctantly agreed to accompany him, though he warned Dapo about the risks. Together, they made their way to Chief Odogwu's estate, a sprawling mansion on the outskirts of Ibadan. The gates were imposing, guarded by stern-faced men who looked like they were more than just security guards. As they approached, Dapo felt a sense of foreboding, but he steeled himself. This was the only way to take control of his life again. The guards allowed them entry after Kunal mentioned that Dapo had a previous engagement with the chief. They were led through a series of hallways adorned with expensive art and furniture, symbols of the chief's immense wealth and power. Eventually, they were shown into a large, lavishly decorated sitting room where Chief Odogwu was waiting. He sat in a plush armchair, a glass of whiskey in his hand, and looked up as they entered. His expression was unreadable, but there was a glint in his eyes that made Dapo's stomach twist with unease. "Dapo," Chief Odogwu said, his voice smooth and calm. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Dapo took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "I came to talk, Chief. About everything." Chief Odogwu raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "I'm listening." "I know what you're trying to do," Dapo began, his voice firm despite the fear gnawing at him. "You've made my life difficult because I refused your offer. But I want to make something clear: I won't be intimidated. You can threaten me, you can try to destroy me, but I won't give in. I'll find another way, even if it means losing everything." The chief studied Dapo for a moment, then let out a low chuckle. "You're a brave young man, Dapo. I'll give you that. But bravery and foolishness often go hand in hand. Do you really think you can stand against me? Against everything I represent?" Dapo met his gaze, refusing to be cowed. "Maybe not. But I'm not alone. There are others who believe in what's right, who won't be bought or bullied. And we're willing to fight for what we believe in, no matter the cost." Chief Odogwu's smile faded, replaced by a cold, calculating expression. "Is that so? And what exactly do you believe in, Dapo? What is it that you're willing to risk everything for?" Dapo hesitated for only a moment before speaking. "I believe in a future where people succeed because of their hard work and integrity, not because of who they know or how much money they have. I believe in fairness, in justice, and the idea that everyone should have a chance to make something of themselves, no matter where they come from." The chief's eyes narrowed. "Those are noble ideals, Dapo. But ideals don't pay the bills. They don't protect you from the harsh realities of life." "No, they don't," Dapo agreed. "But they give people like me something to strive for, something worth fighting for." and I would rather live struggling for what's right than thrive on what's wrong." There was a long silence as Chief Odogwu studied him, his expression unreadable. Finally, he sighed, setting his glass down on the table. "You remind me of myself when I was your age, Dapo. I, too, believed I could change the world with nothing but my wits and my will. But the world broke me, as it will break you." Dapo said nothing, knowing there was no point in arguing with someone who had long since given up on such ideals. Chief Odogwu stood up, walking over to the window and looking out at the vast estate he had built. "I'm going to give you one last chance, Dapo. Walk away from this. Forget about your so-called principles and join me. I can make you more powerful than you ever imagined." Or, he turned to face Dapo, his eyes hard as steel. "You can continue on your current path and watch as everything you care about crumbles around you." Dapo felt a surge of anger at the chief's arrogance, but he kept his voice steady. "I've already made my choice, Chief. I'm not going to back down." The chief studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "So be it. But don't say I didn't warn you." Dapo turned to leave, but before he reached the door, Chief Odogwu spoke again, his voice calm but carrying a note of finality. "Remember, Dapo, everyone has a breaking point. And when you reach yours, don't come crawling back to me." Dapo paused for just a moment, then continued walking. Kunnel followed, his face pale but determined. As they left the estate, Dapo felt a strange sense of relief mixed with dread. He had stood up to Chief Odogwu, but he knew the battle was far from over. The chief was not a man to be crossed lightly, and Dapo had just made a powerful enemy. Over the next few weeks, Dapo's life continued to spiral downward. His grades continued to suffer, and his relationships with his professors and peers deteriorated even further. He was ostracized, not just by the university community but also by his neighbors and acquaintances in Ibadan. People who once greeted him warmly now avoided him, afraid to be associated with someone who had fallen out of favor with Chief Odogwu. Dapo's financial situation worsened as well. His father's shop was suddenly audited by the tax authorities, and a series of fines and back taxes were imposed, threatening to bankrupt the business. Dapo knew this was no coincidence. It was another of Chief Odogwu's methods of exerting pressure. Despite the mounting difficulties, Dapo refused to give in. He continued to fight, even as the odds stacked against him. He reached out to human rights organizations and anti-corruption groups, hoping to expose Chief Odogwu's influence over the university and the city's institutions. But the chief's reach was vast, and many of these groups were either too afraid to get involved or were already compromised. One evening, as Dapo was returning to his hostel, he was confronted by a group of men. They were the same men who had approached him earlier, but this time there were more of them, and their intentions were clear. "Chief Odogwu warned you," one of them said, his voice laced with menace. "Now it's time to teach you a lesson." Before Dapo could react, the men set upon him, beating him mercilessly. He fought back as best he could, but he was outnumbered and overpowered. The attack seemed to last forever, and by the time the men finally left, Dapo was lying on the ground, battered and bleeding. He was found later by Kunnel, who had been worried when Dapo didn't return home on time. Kunnel rushed him to the hospital, where Dapo spent several days recovering from his injuries. The doctor said he was lucky to be alive, but the physical scars were nothing compared to the emotional toll the attack took on him. Lying in the hospital bed, Dapo wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. He had stood by his principles, but at what cost? His education, his future, his family's livelihood, all of it was in jeopardy. And for what? A few ideals that seemed increasingly hollow in the face of such overwhelming opposition. Just when Dapo was beginning to lose hope, a surprising turn of events occurred. A journalist from a prominent national newspaper reached out to him. She had heard about Dapo's situation and was interested in investigating the corruption and intimidation tactics being used by Chief Odogwu. The journalist, Aisha Ibrahim, was known for her fearless reporting and her dedication to exposing the truth, no matter the risks. She met with Dapo in the hospital and listened to his story, taking meticulous notes and promising to do everything she could to bring the truth to light. With Aisha's help, Dapo's story was published in a major newspaper, sparking outrage across the country. The article detailed not only Dapo's personal ordeal but also the broader implications of Chief Odogwu's influence over the university and other institutions. It was a scathing exposé that painted the chief as a corrupt and ruthless figure who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Public pressure mounted on the government to investigate Chief Odogwu, and the university administration came under scrutiny for its complicity in the chief's activities. Protests erupted on campus, with students demanding accountability and reform. For the first time in months, Dapo felt a glimmer of hope. The tide was turning, and people were beginning to see the truth. But he knew the fight was far from over. Chief Odogwu was still a powerful man, and he would not go down without a fight. As the investigation into Chief Odogwu's activities intensified, Dapo found himself thrust into the spotlight. He became a symbol of resistance, a young man who had stood up to a powerful figure and refused to back down. The attention was both a blessing and a curse. It gave him a platform to speak out, but it also made him a target. Chief Odogwu, predictably, did not take the exposé lying down. He launched a fierce campaign to discredit Dapo and undermine the investigation. He used his wealth and influence to spread misinformation, casting Dapo as a troubled student with ulterior motives. The media began to report on the supposed other side of the story, and some people began to doubt Dapo's claims. Despite the backlash, the investigation continued. Aisha Ibrahim's reporting had ignited a fire, and pressure from the public and international watchdogs forced the authorities to act. Chief Odogwu found himself facing legal challenges he could not easily dismiss. The government initiated inquiries into his business dealings and his influence over public institutions. Dapo, meanwhile, faced ongoing harassment and threats. His family's situation remained precarious, and he continued to struggle with the physical and emotional scars from the attack. However, he was buoyed by the support of his peers and the growing movement calling for justice. The protests on campus and the public outcry kept the pressure on Chief Odogwu, and Dapo began to see some light at the end of the tunnel. One day, as Dapo was preparing for a public forum where he was to speak about his experiences, Kunal approached him with news. "Dapo, I just heard that Chief Odogwu is being investigated by the authorities. They've seized some of his assets and are looking into his connections." Dapo's heart raced. "Really? That's incredible news." Kunal nodded. "It's not over yet, but it's a significant step. The media is picking up on it, and there's more coverage than ever. The pressure is mounting." Dapo took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of hope and apprehension. The battle was far from won, but the tide was turning. He knew that the final showdown was approaching, and he had to remain steadfast. As the investigation unfolded, evidence of Chief Odogwu's corruption became undeniable. The authorities pressed charges, and Chief Odogwu was forced to appear in court. The trial was highly publicized, and the courtroom was packed with journalists, activists, and concerned citizens. Dapo was called to testify, and as he took the stand, he felt a profound sense of purpose. He recounted his experiences and the extent of Chief Odogwu's influence, presenting evidence that Aisha and others had gathered. His testimony was emotional and powerful, and it was clear that his courage had a significant impact on the proceedings. Chief Odogwu's defense was relentless, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. Witnesses came forward, and the corrupt practices that had once seemed like rumors were laid bare for all to see. As the trial progressed, it became apparent that Chief Odogwu's empire was crumbling. Finally, the verdict came. Chief Odogwu was found guilty on multiple counts of corruption, bribery, and intimidation. He was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, and his assets were seized to compensate for his crimes. The victory was bittersweet for Dapo. He had achieved a significant personal and public triumph, but the struggle had taken a toll on him. His father's shop was still recovering, and Dapo's own future remained uncertain. Yet, there was a sense of accomplishment and justice that made the hardships worth it. In the aftermath of the trial, Dapo began to rebuild his life. He continued his studies with renewed focus and determination. The university, under new leadership, started implementing reforms to prevent future abuses of power. Kunal remained by Dapo's side, and their friendship was strengthened by the trials they had endured together. They both continued to be involved in advocacy work, using their experiences to help others who faced similar challenges. Dapo's story became a symbol of resilience and integrity, inspiring many. He spoke at various events and forums, sharing his journey and encouraging others to stand up for what is right, no matter the obstacles. As the years passed, Dapo's efforts bore fruit. His father's shop was thriving again, and Dapo graduated with honors, ready to make his mark on the world. He remained committed to his ideals, determined to make a difference in his community and beyond. Chief Odogwu's fall from power had sent a clear message: integrity and justice could triumph over corruption and oppression. Dapo had faced seemingly insurmountable odds and emerged victorious, proving that where there is a will, there is indeed a way. And as he looked toward the future, Dapo knew that the path he had chosen was not an easy one, but it was the right one. He had faced the darkness and had come out stronger, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead with the same courage and conviction that had seen him through the toughest of times.